Hi, welcome to Alex's ESL World. I'm Alex, and I'm here to help you with your English. Today's lesson is about the perfect verb tenses in present, past, and future. I'll start with how they're formed. The perfect tenses use have as the auxiliary and ed as the ending to the base verb. And by the way, this is called the past participle. Of course, with irregular verbs, you might not have ed, so you use whatever the past participle is. So here's the verb to have, conjugated like we'll use it in the perfect tenses. I have, you have, he has, she has, it has. Don't forget, third person singular, that's the one that always changes. So have becomes has, but just in third person singular. Next, on the plural side, we have, you have, and they have. We'll add the ed to the base verb, or we'll use the past participle, and this is what it looks like for the verb to work. I have worked, you have worked, he has worked, she has worked, it has worked, we have worked, you have worked, and they have worked. Here are some example sentences using the present perfect. I have taught English for a long time. This is true. I have taught English for a long time and I'm still teaching English. Anna has already eaten breakfast. We don't know when she ate breakfast, but that's not so important. I haven't talked about questions or negatives yet, but I will in a later video. Here's a question that uses the present perfect. Have we ever been to that park? If you're like me, you might tend to forget things sometimes. Maybe you see a park on a map, but you're not sure if you've been to that exact park before. So you ask your friend, have we ever been to that park? If you're confused about having to use the past participle with the present perfect verb tense, let me try to clear that up for you. The timeline for present perfect isn't as clear as the verb timelines usually are. This one can change depending on the meaning. Here are some ways we use the present perfect. We use the present perfect to talk about a recently completed action. Note that the time the action was completed is not important. If the time is important, you'll use the simple past, but more about that later. I want to bring to your attention that it's really common to use the word just in this type of present perfect sentence. An example of using the present perfect in this way is, the train has just left the station. Here I'm using an irregular verb, so the past participle is left. There's no past form of to leave that ends in ed. If we look at the timeline for this sentence, you'll see that sometime in the past, the train left. When we use the word just, it implies that the train left in the very recent past, maybe just a minute or two ago. We could also say the train has left the station without the word just. This slightly changes the meaning. Now the train might have left 30 minutes ago or an hour ago. It doesn't really matter when the train left in this case. If you're wondering why we don't just say the train left the station, hang on, I will get to that. The simple past is very close in meaning to the present perfect. First, let's look at other ways we use the present perfect. Another way we use the present perfect is when a time period is not complete, like when we use for a long time, this morning, this afternoon, today, this week, that kind of time period. So an example of this is, Susan has lived in Canada for a long time. She started living in Canada at some time in the past. The exact time isn't important, but she's been there for a long time. She's still living there. It's important to note that the time she started living in Canada is not important. The next way we use the present perfect is when an action or event happened at some unknown time in the past. This could be an action that has repeated in the past, or it could just be that it happened and we don't know when. An example is Tom has traveled to Indonesia. It doesn't matter when he went there, just that he's been there. Finally, we use the present perfect when the time of a past action or event is not known or important, but the result of the action or event is known and it's important. The timeline will look just like the last two timelines, and they both look just like the simple past. Here are some examples. I have mopped the floor. I'm not saying when I mopped the floor. It doesn't matter when I did. What I'm telling you is that the floor is clean. I may be telling you this because the floor is still wet and I don't want you to walk on it until it dries. Another example, Margaret has lived in Paris. When I say this, it means that Margaret doesn't live in Paris now, but she did in the past. It's not the same as present continuous because the action isn't happening right now. It's not happening anymore. Now, if I say Margaret has lived in Paris since 2012, it means she moved there in 2012 and she still lives there. This is another way we use the present perfect. The sentence can be explained with this timeline. In 2012, Margaret moved to Paris. That's the first X on the timeline. She stayed there. She still lives there now, which is the second X. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but she lives there now. So we say, Margaret has lived in Paris since 2012. So we use since with a particular time and for with a duration of time. Let's look at some examples so you can see what I'm talking about. I've been here since 7 o'clock. I've been here for 2 weeks. Remember, since plus a particular time, in this case since 7 o'clock, and for plus a duration of time. Here it's 2 weeks. Let's do another one. I have had this same pair of shoes for 3 years. I have had these shoes since 2016. I do keep shoes for a long time because I like good shoes. Now, before I go to past perfect, I want to talk a little bit about the present perfect and the simple past. The present perfect is very similar to the simple past. The form, however, is quite different. The perfect tenses all have an auxiliary verb, which is have, and it's the first verb, so that's the one that's going to show the tense. For present perfect, we'll use has or have plus the past participle. The past participle looks the same as simple past for regular verbs. We take the base form of the verb and add ed, or if it ends in e, we just add d. You can see here under the present perfect for regular verbs, you'll have I, you, we, and they have worked. We're still using work as our example verb. And for the third person singular, which is she, he, and it, we'll use has worked. For the simple past, they're all just worked. English has a lot of irregular verbs, but here's an example using the verb to speak. The present perfect is I, you, we, and they have spoken. Spoken is the past participle of to speak. He, she, and it will be has spoken. Notice that the simple past is spoke, not spoken. So usually the simple past form is the same as the past participle, but not always. So you need to remember that there is a difference between past and past participle. Actually, a participle is a form of a verb that's used with an auxiliary. The past participle usually ends in ed, and the present participle ends in ing. That's the form we use for the progressive tenses. Also, we use participles as adjectives, but we'll talk about those in later videos. Let's look now at how we use the present perfect. There are some questions you can ask yourself that will help you to see the differences between the present perfect and the simple past. The first question is, has the time period finished? The time indicated in the present perfect will not be finished. For example, if I say, I've baked 3 cakes this week. No, I haven't. That's too much. But it means that I've only baked 3 cakes this week, but I might make another one. The week hasn't finished. But if I say I baked 3 cakes last week, I'm using the simple past for a time period that's over. It's not last week any longer, and I don't have the option to make another cake last week. It's over. The next question you can ask yourself is this new information or old? The present perfect is often used when giving recent news. For example, I might say, John has crashed his car again. Maybe John is not a good driver. He just goes too fast, and sometimes he tries to text while he's driving. That's so dangerous. So he crashed his car again. While it's not new that he's a bad driver, it's new information to say that he's crashed his car again. If we say John crashed his car last week, we don't know if he's a bad driver or not. We don't know if this has ever happened to him before. All we know is that last week he crashed his car. So this is old information since it's something that happened last week. It would be the same if we said last year. This is how we use the simple past. The third question we can ask is it a specific time? When we use the present perfect, we don't use a specific time. It doesn't matter when something happened. In the example, I've seen that movie already, it doesn't matter when I saw the movie. If I'm going to the movies with a friend, we're going to want to see something that neither of us has seen before. So telling my friend when I saw the movie is just not important. It's important that I've already seen that one. We need to find another movie to see. But if I say, I saw that movie on Thursday, I'm giving specific information about when I saw the movie. Maybe my friend really wants to see this one, and she asks me if it's been a long time since I saw that movie. Maybe she thinks I won't remember much of it, and maybe I'll want to see it again with her. But if I say, I saw that movie on Thursday, I probably remember it, unless I slept through most of the movie. And if that's true, it must not be a very interesting movie. We should probably find another one to see together. The last question is almost like the first one. Has the action finished? This is for sentences with for or since. In the present perfect, we use for and since when the actions haven't finished. For example, I have lived in California for 5 years. I've actually lived in California for more than 30 years, but let's just go with the sentence. When I say I've lived in California for 5 years, it means I still live here. But if I say I lived in California for 5 years, which is using the simple past, it means I don't live in California anymore. So these are some ways you can tell which verb tense you need to use, the present perfect or the simple past. Let's take a look now at the past perfect. This form is very easy. You just need to use the auxiliary have in the past tense because it's the first verb in the sentence, so you'll use had, and then you add the past participle. Using the verb to work, it becomes had worked for all the subject pronouns. Here's some examples. I had taught ESL for 13 years before I returned to school to become a science teacher. This is true. I became a science teacher, and I didn't like it as much as being an ESL teacher, so I returned to where my heart was. Next, Anna had already eaten breakfast before she had her coffee. I haven't given you any questions yet, so I decided to throw this one in. Had we been to that park before yesterday? I'll be talking about different kinds of questions later, But notice the word order here. To change the statement in this question, we just switch the auxiliary had with the subject. I think this is done in a lot of languages. I want to show you the timeline for past perfect. When we use the past perfect, we're talking about two events or actions that happened in the past. They didn't happen at the same time. In the example here, they had worked on their project for a week before they finished it. If you look at the timeline, you can see they worked for 1 week and then they finished. Both actions happened in the past. This is a complex sentence, which means that there are two clauses in one sentence. One is an independent clause, which means it can be a sentence by itself, and the other is a dependent clause, which means it won't make sense by itself, even though you do have a subject and a verb. The first clause is, they had worked on their project for a week. And the second one is, before they finished it. Notice the verb tenses in these two ideas. The first one is had worked, and that's past perfect. The second verb is finished, which is the simple past. This is how we construct this kind of sentence. Let's look at the examples from before, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The first one is, I had taught ESL for 13 years before I returned to school to become a science teacher. See the verb? It's had taught. In this sentence, I give you a clue about which thing happens first. I said before. This is commonly used in past perfect sentences. So we use past perfect to talk about the thing that happened first, and we use the simple past to talk about the thing we did second. In this case, I returned to school to become a science teacher. The next example, Anna had already eaten breakfast before she had her coffee. Another word we often used in past perfect is already. That's a clue. Just like before, it's used to indicate which thing happened first. In this sentence, Anna ate breakfast first. We actually have two clues in this sentence. Anna had already eaten breakfast before, so we have already and before. There's no doubt here that she ate breakfast and then she had coffee. So the past perfect is used first, had eaten, and the simple past is used second, and that's had. We often say we had coffee rather than we drank. It means the same thing. There's one thing I want to bring to your attention about the past perfect before I leave it, and that is the past perfect isn't necessary when the context is clear. What I mean is, if the order of events is very clear, like when we use before or after. Here's an example. She had left home before he arrived. This is a perfectly correct sentence using past perfect, but it's also correct to say, she left home before he arrived. One more thing, the preposition by or the phrase by the time are common in past perfect sentences. The structure works like this. By plus a time or by the time plus the subject are often used with the past perfect. Let me show you how that works. By means before or not later than. By 6 p.m., the sun had started to set. By 6 p.m., that's the time. The sun is the subject, and had started is the verb in the past perfect. By the time is a prepositional phrase, and it means the same as by, not later than a certain time. This one is the beginning of a complex sentence, a sentence that has an independent clause and a dependent clause. Don't worry about that right now. So our example is, by the time we finished our dinner, the sun had set. So the subject of the first clause is we, and the verb is finished, which is in the simple past. The subject in the second clause is sun, and the verb is had set, which is in the past perfect. Therefore, the sun set first, and then we ate our dinner. Got it? Yeah, I'm sure you do. If you don't, ask me a question. And now for the future perfect. You can see that we have to use will. I really will talk about going to, but in a separate lesson. Will makes it future, and have plus past participle makes it perfect. Just like in past perfect, we're going to keep the same conjugation for all the subjects. Future perfect is always will plus have plus the past participle of the verb you're using. For example, I will have taught English for 20 years this January. This is true. My first ESL job started in January of 2000. That's why I always say I've taught ESL for about 20 years. It's almost 20. It will be in January. Anna will have eaten breakfast by the time she goes to work. Remember when I said that by the time used in past perfect dependent clauses takes the simple past? Well, when we use by the time with future perfect sentences, we use the simple present in that clause. Take a look at this sentence. Anna will have eaten breakfast. This is future perfect. Will have eaten. She hasn't eaten yet, but she will. The rest of the sentence is by the time she goes to work. So this means she will first eat breakfast and then she'll go to work. Let's go back to our example about some people working on a project. By the time they finish their project, they will have worked on it for a week. You can see on the timeline that both things happen in the future. They will work on their project and they will finish their project. Using logic, you know they have to work on it before they finish it. You also know that by the phrase by the time that is used in future perfect. So, when do we use the future perfect? We use future perfect first when an action or a series of actions will be complete before a specific time in the future. The example is, we will have made 10 videos by next month. I've moved now over to the left so you can see more of the future. So there are 2 X's, but if we completed 10 videos, maybe we need 10 X's. I'm just showing that we will do this thing repeatedly between now and next month. The second way we use the future perfect is in a situation that continues for a period of time until maybe after a particular time in the future. I hope that made sense. Our example, maybe this will make sense. Our example, on November 19th, we will have been married for 8 years. As you can see from this timeline, we were married before now. For example, on November 19th, we will have been married for 8 years. And that's the perfect tenses. It's a little more complicated, but I hope I've explained it so that you can understand when we use this tense. If not, please let me know. You can always communicate with me on my website or on my YouTube channel. You can also email me anytime at alex@alexseslworld.com. I'd be happy to hear from you. And that's the end of this video. Remember to be kind to each other and keep in touch. Bye for now.